So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all. Welcome to another webinar in our GPI Open Webinar series. This month, we have put together an exciting panel to unpack and share the experiences on a very important topic around research inequalities in the Global South and Global North. I'm Genevieve Habdrani. I'm the Community of Practice Lead for GPI, and I have the honor of moderating the session today. Before we get started, I just want to point out a few housekeeping points. Please note that this event is being recorded and it will be made publicly available. As you will see, to avoid any disruptions, only speakers, cameras, and microphones will be active during the session. And if time allows, which we have planned that it should, there will be a Q&A session following a brief panel discussion. So please pop any questions in the Q&A section as highlighted on your screen. I think it's a triangle, a circle, and a square that you'll see that you can just follow. If you're unable to do this, you might be able to pop it in the chat as well, and we'll keep an eye on that throughout the session. And so now I'd like to give a warm welcome to our speakers. So we'll actually give them some time to introduce themselves in a moment. But before we do that, I just want to say that the speakers and the panelists today are from various universities. And so we have Oxford University joining us. We also have other institutions as well. And I just wanted to point out also that with us, we have the Graduate Inequalities Review, which is run by graduate students, which you'll hear a bit more about in a minute. And I know Mary Ann will also just introduce that to us as well. We have various speakers, like I said, from the Philippines, from North Africa, that have joined today. So we're hoping that you'll enjoy the session and it will spark some nice discussion as well, including questions from all of you on the call. So to kick us off, I'm going to hand over to Dr. Godfrey Sue, who will be introducing the topic and setting the scene for this panel discussion today. Godfrey, over to you.
Thank you very, very much, Jane. And I am really glad to be here this afternoon. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Thank you very much, everybody, for showing interest in this really important topic. The webinar is focusing on inequalities that we see or have had or have experienced in our work in research. I want to thank the panel very much for accepting to be part of this panel. I'm glad to see all of you, this wonderful panel. I'm glad to be taking this opportunity to introduce the topic. So we are here, and I think, Jen, if you can put up my slides. I have a couple of slides that I would like to share. We have a panel that has been put together to reflect the different diversities that we have and collaborations within the GPI. And I think it's going to be quite an interesting conversation this day. The panel, Jane, have you introduced the panel already, or each person will come to introduce themselves later?
Each person will introduce themselves later. Just give me 1 second. I'll just show your slides in 1 second.
Okay, so thank you for introducing me. And as have been introduced, I am based in Uganda at the University of Makerere, where I'm a researcher, senior lecturer, and have been doing quite a lot of collaborative research. And as I speak, I think I'll be sharing some of the experiences from collaborations and share the manifestations of inequalities, but also equalities in research. So as wait for my slides, there they come. I think the first thing that we really need to ask ourselves, is there a North-South divide? And I think to do this, and this is not really a critical slide, but just because we have so many people and we sometimes use these terms very interchangeably, I thought that it's important to begin by highlighting just what is the South-North divide. And the South-North divide is a term that is often used in the geography of socioeconomics. It is used to describe a difference in economic development between countries based in the Northern Hemisphere and those based in the Southern Hemisphere. As you can see, that is the map of the world, the globe. and different continents and different regions, even those that are represented today in this meeting, are all there. But what we see in the inequalities that are often being described, that is that these inequalities seem to permeate different aspects of our lives, our work, our collaborations, and they manifest in a range of areas, including science and technology, and in the knowledge economy. Interestingly, research, the research realm is not spared from these inequalities. Next slide. So in thinking about the North-South inequalities in research, it's important to recognize that there is an increase in the size and range of North-South collaborations or partnerships. And quite often, when we all reflect and when we come together as a community of practice or as different scholars, we often emphasize the core principles of equality, capacity building, and sharing of responsibilities. And indeed, there are many instances and examples of positive experiences from these collaborations and relationships in research. However, when you look at it, if you examine the kind of conversations and discussions and the literature that is coming across in different parts of the world, it is very clear that the Northern dominance and historical privileges continue to persist. And so there are so many people in global collaborations that are disappointed, even though they share some common positive experiences. So different terms have been evoked to describe the processes and the mechanisms of the disadvantage. Some people use the term Western imperialism, others use neocolonialism, and many other such terms. However, critics argue that a neocolonial attitude or stance to research is unhelpful because it undermines the mutual benefits that might arise actually from the collaborations in research. So today, this webinar is a great opportunity for us all to engage in this broader conversation that is going on around decolonization of research and to share our different perspectives, to reflect and examine the nature and manifestations, as well as discuss examples and consequences of the inequalities that we experience, and then propose mechanisms for changing or improving these inequalities, particularly as the Global Parenting Initiative community. There are several manifestations of inequality in research, and I think that this is going to form the basis of our discussion. Different panelists are going to reflect on this, but I just wanted to highlight a few of them. In the area of funding, we often see funding inequalities, right from allocation of funds, but also from who funds the research. And one thing that seems to be quite disappointing sometimes in global research inequalities is that even the funders seem to know or to believe that they know more than the people from the global south about the research areas, the issues that should be researched. So you find a funding applications being put out with particular restrictions, particular descriptions of what should be researched on. And this sometimes undermines the nature of collaborations. In terms of conceptualization of research, the language, the ideas, definitions of problems, sometimes there is an imbalance, and local researchers, global south researchers, sometimes don't get quite acknowledged for initiating an idea. And an idea can easily be but appropriated by a northern researcher, group of researchers, and made to look like it originated from the north. We also experience inequalities in field practice. Sometimes we ignore the fact that global south researchers are the experts. They know how to conduct research in the field. And this sometimes creates lots of tensions and delays, causes unnecessary delays in execution of research work. In terms of research ethics, there are a whole lot of issues to be identified there. And I think sometimes one of the frustrations that I often hear researchers from the global south expressing, even those from the global north, is the differences in perspectives of research ethics. You find one research ethics from the global north is exerting some influence and looking out for particular value systems in the approval of research and other processes of conducting research, which may not be sensitive to the local characteristics. Sometimes we have noticed a tendency for Southern research institutions to be considered as annexes. If there are 2 or 3 collaborating institutions, and some of them are from the South, you find most of the instructions and the, the requirements, do this and do that, is being articulated, but in the context of what a Southern research institution has not done. And in the relationships, we also find that there is sometimes institutions from the global North that are actually set up in countries in the global South, and these conduct research. And what we tend to see here is that the presence of those research institutions that are affiliated to the North tend to come with advantages, strengths in terms of capacity building and other benefits. They can attract funding, but sometimes they seem to stifle local research institutions. And finally, in authorship trends, and I think this is pretty clear to all of us, and I think that today we have an opportunity to reflect on these issues and to genuinely discuss the kind of collaborations that are necessary. I'm so glad that within the GPI, we have really tried to address some of these things, but there are still areas that we can do better in. And I want to believe that the panelists this morning, this afternoon, are going to examine these issues in ways that will help us all to come up with recommendations that are appropriate to our collaboration and indeed to other wider collaborations. Thank you very much. I hope that this can lead us to a more fruitful discussion led by the panelists. Thank you, Jean.
Thank you so much, Godfrey, for setting the scene and for actually highlighting a lot of what will come out in the panel discussion today. I'm just going to go to opening the panel discussion now. So what we'd like to do now is actually have the panelists introduce themselves, but in doing so, also positioning themselves in where they currently sit and how they've been affected, or not even affected, but how they think about these research inequalities in the global North, global South. So in answering and in talking to the introduction, could you also then tell us a bit about what is the most important consideration when building equality in research, when having this dynamic around the global North and global South? I'm going to hand over to Dr. Jamie Lachman first. Jamie, if you can just introduce yourself and then also just share your main consideration.
Thank you very much, Jen, and thank you, Godfrey, for setting the stage for this fruitful discussion. My background is there on the screen. I have the fortune of working with all of the people on the panel today. I would like to position first myself as a global North-based researcher with a annexed identity in the global South at the University of Cape Town, but my main affiliation is within the University of Oxford. Originally from South Africa, and what's been very interesting for me is in the past 25 years, you've seen a huge increase of research being conducted in low and middle income countries, primarily the global South. But most of that is still led by global North institutions. So whereas maybe 30 years ago, we saw very few studies that were being conducted, especially in our fields of violence prevention and improving child learning and development outcomes through parenting programs, very few little research being done in the global South. Now we see a lot of it, but most of it is still being led by institutions like the University of Oxford. For me, I think that one of the critical aspects we need to face when we talk about this North-South divide is to be more specific about what we mean, and the importance of focusing on how we can promote locally led research and locally led research initiatives rather than this blanket label of North and South. And particularly this brings up issues around power and equity. and how we can shift that equity from the privileged or institutions, whether they are based in the North or South, to previously disadvantaged or marginalized institutions, and how we can actively be engaging not only the voices and Global South researchers, but also the voices and participation of the communities in which we are doing our research, so that they are also part of the process of setting the agenda, determining where the funding goes, determining how we do our research, what we do our research on, and for whom it is. And so I think that is something that is very key to how the Global Parenting Initiative is trying to begin that process of shifting power imbalances between North and South. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Jeremy. And now handing over to Dr. Leanne Alampai, if you could also introduce yourself and then just share your main consideration. You might just be muted. Or has Leanne been knocked off the call? Oh. Sorry about that. I'm not sure what happened there, but I'm adding you as a co-host. Leanne, can you try again? Ah, there we go.
Yes.
Perfect. Leanne, can you hear me?
Okay, yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, there you go. Okay, good evening, everyone. It's evening in my part of the world. I'm Lian Peña Alampay. I'm from the Ateneo de Manila University in the Philippines, where I am a professor of psychology. And for me, the most important consideration with respect to this global North, global South divide is really the attitude or the mindset. And I think it's really important that global North and global South researchers invest in true collaboration, where there is mutual engagement, mutual learning, and mutual respect for each other's cultural contexts, local knowledge, mutual valuing of what each collaborator brings to the table. And I say this because I've had experiences of varying levels of collaboration with international collaborators, and they range from what I would call very token collaboration, where very early in my career, I was asked to collect tons of data without any inputs on conceptualization or design, but I was also very naive. And so I collected all this data, and I did end up as a co-author in that publication among maybe 40 plus other co-authors who all just collected data. So that's an extreme example. And here we have GPI, where I've had the real pleasure of feeling that our inputs here in the Philippines are truly valued and respected, from conceptualization to design to figuring out what the priorities are, what's most relevant in our culture. Another thing I'd like to bring up is my particular position in this divide. I think at the personal level, I also struggle with this divide because I'm global North educated. And when I reflect on my own research education and background, I have a lot of sensibilities, I think, that I share with global North researchers. So even here in the Philippines, I have to be mindful and not make the assumption that I am always a cultural insider, because even within our communities, I am amazed or surprised that I, in fact, feel like an outsider, and that I also have to bridge divides within my own culture. And so I think this connects with what Jamie said earlier, that global North and global South are not just homogeneous entities, that within global North, there's a lot of diversity. Within global South, there's a lot of diversity. Within one country or cultural context, there's a lot of diversity. And when we engage with partners, when we collaborate, we always, it would be good to bear in mind these points of alignment, but also the points of diversity where understandings have to be bridged. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Leanne, for sharing your insights. Next, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Joyce Wamoyi. If you can just turn your, I hope your microphone is working.
Yeah.
Yes. Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much, Jen. Good evening, everyone. Good afternoon. Good morning. So my name is Joyce Wamoyi, and I'm a social behavioral scientist based at the National Institute for Medical Research in Mwanza, Tanzania. And I have to say from the start that my whole career has actually involved collaboration with the North. So I'm a Southern-based researcher based in Africa. But my collaborations have been with the North. So I've really had lots of experience really working with collaborators from the North, but most of the work that I've also been involved in has been funded from the North. So clearly, I sit within this position with lots of experience on what we have observed, what we have experienced, but just to say the situation is actually improving as we continue working on this research project. So my one most important consideration, there are multiple, many have already been mentioned, but just to touch on this issue of generation of the research agenda and the policy agenda when it comes to research, clearly the person who defines the problem, the agenda, controls what happens there. And that's what has led to the knowledge generation disparities that actually we see. That's the person who seeks the funding. That's the person who controls the agenda. So clearly, my most important consideration is for the Global South research partners, given the loads of capacity that has already gone in building the capacity of researchers and people in different fields in the South, should be trusted actually by donors, especially that they can actually define their research agenda. They can define what the issue is, in as much as they might not actually have the funds or have easy access to these funds. So if they're on the forefront of actually designing the agenda, then they'll have a bit of a control in terms of what are the priorities and how they can collect data and everything related to solving what they think the problem is. So then being on the forefront clearly will give them a proper grasp in contributing to knowledge out there, but also to solutions that actually affect them in their setting. So that can be done collaboratively, of course, with the Global North partners, but at least they should be trusted that they can actually do that very well, because we've already have lots of capacity that has been built and many are in a position to do that. Still, we acknowledge that capacity building is still something that is needed, but if they sit on that table, especially the funding table, to say this is the area that we think is the most important for now, it's really going to help us in terms of how we move around addressing some of the inequalities that actually exist. I'm just shifting away, of course, to the person who writes the grant. It's the person with the control. It's the person who knows the requirements of it, by actually really just acknowledging that these are the people might also sit in, they know their problem, and they could also contribute something meaningfully. So just calling everyone to really consider that. And we've seen a massive change and improvement in some of the collaborations that we have been involved in. An example is the GPI. Really floated Southern partners genuinely involved in how things are made, how decisions are made, and how prioritization are made on the most and important key areas for the research. So just calling everyone to really be aware and to work towards that. Thanks very much, Jen.
Thank you so much, Joyce, for your response. I'm now going to hand over to Mary Ann Vital. Can you please just make sure that you can unmute? Yes. Perfect. There's been some technical issues, so I just want to make sure. Please go ahead and introduce yourself, and then also just to share your main consideration.
Okay. Good day, everyone. Thank you, Jen. I'm Marianne Vital. I am co-chief editor of the Graduate Inequality Review, and that's actually one of the hats and one of the positions or positionalities in this discussion. So just a little bit about the Graduate Inequality Review. It's a student-led publication based in the Department of Social Policy at the University of Oxford. And as a publication, what we wanted to do is engage more Global South researchers, ask them to contribute to the journal, and also participate in our conferences and our different platforms. And I am also the second hat that I'm wearing is I am a doctoral researcher from the Global South, but doing my research in the Global North, although the context that I'm studying is a Global South context, which is the Philippines. So I guess to answer that question, which I think is really tricky, because listening from my fellow panelists, there's not one single binding constraint, and therefore we can think of so many solutions to ensure that Global North and South collaboration is mutually beneficial and equitable. And I guess to contribute to what has been said already, I think it's important to bridge funding disparities. And I can think of the ways that it could, number one, level the playing field between the institutions that are working together. And secondly, just thinking about our experience in our recent conference. So GIR conducted a conference, and like I said, we wanted to give this opportunity for Global South researchers to present their work. However, it was very difficult for these Global South researchers to come and participate in our event, which was held in Oxford. And although we provided some financial support, it wasn't enough. And it kind of I felt that they missed the opportunity to be present and connect with like-minded researchers. And hearing from the feedback from the researchers and the other attendees of that event, hearing the research alone from these Global South contexts actually made them appreciate more about the issues that Global South is experiencing. And it would have been amazing if they were able to come. So I guess that's my main point. If there was a way for that disparity to be narrowed and provide more financial support for Global South researchers, I think that would be that would help a lot. Thank you. Over to you, Jen.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Marianne. And moving on to the final person to introduce yourself. So Makanya, can you? Okay, your mic's working.
Yes.
Perfect.
Yes.
Awesome.
Mic is working. Thank you very much.
Over to you.
Great, thank you. Yes, so as Jen has said, my name is Makanya, and I'm very glad we're having this conversation. So my background is in clinical psychology. I spent many years working with children, adolescents, parents, families, etc., and under-resourced communities before moving into research full-time. And since then, I have really had the privilege of working on collaborative research projects between the Global North and Global South at Wits University and UCT, involving, digital interventions, adolescent mental health, and now parenting as the research manager for the Parent Tech Studies. So I may not have as much experience in research as the rest of the panelists, but by this point, I have seen firsthand the disparities and I think opportunities that exist in our global research landscape. And I really hope to be a part of the solution in nurturing nurturing equitable collaborations, not only advancing scientific knowledge, but also uplifting communities and respecting local context. So one crucial consideration, I think, for building equality in global North and South research collaborations is the focus on capacity building. I know that's come up, a lot, but that just shows how important this is, as well as the development of sustainable research infrastructure in the global South. I think this needs to encompass both human and institutional capacities to ensure that research efforts are, robust, self-sustaining, and I think less reliant on external funding and support in the long term. And Jen, I'm very happy to speak about more about this when you start asking questions. Great.
Thank you so much, Namakanya. And now, just to say thank you to the panel for introducing themselves and also their opening remarks. I think it sets the stage quite nicely and alludes to a lot of what Godfrey had shared with us as well. But now we'd like to just ask a few specific questions, a few pointed questions to the panel. And so, the panel can actually just switch their cameras on. That will be really useful. Thank you. I'm going to start with reflecting on what Joyce had shared with us. And so Joyce, in your opening remarks, you touched on aspects of funding. And I wanted to know what are some of those primary, or I'm sure people on the call would like to know, what are some of the primary challenges faced by researchers in the Global South in securing funding and how these can possibly be addressed? I think I'm posing it to Joyce, but if the rest of the panel has any comments as well, they can also reflect.
Yeah. Thanks very much, Jen. I think related to issues of funding is just the funding models that actually are used at the moment. Most of them, of course, encourage the North-based institutions to act as the donor intermediaries, of course, funding project proposals, channels for funding, and then being an intermediary to South-based institutions. So clearly, the link has always been trusted to be the North-based partner. And as they're doing that, clearly, they need overheads to function the same way the Global South institutions and researchers need overheads for those institutions actually to grow and function efficiently. So then clearly, by the time the overhead even gets to the Global South institution, it's always very little to really keep those institutions functioning properly. So clearly, my suggestion would be for donor agencies to actually review their funding models and where the Global North institutions are leading. The Global South should be trusted actually to have capacity to lead, to define the problem, but also to be trusted that they can ask for the grants more directly than actually channeling the grants through a North-based partner in many cases. And actually, I also have to mention that we've seen improvements already through donors such as, especially foundations are doing this very well at the moment. They're encouraging South institutions and researchers to apply for funds directly through them. So they're increasingly trusting them. Even some of the big ones like MRC, they're encouraging collaborations. Of course, some of them might not be genuine enough, but efforts are going towards that. So that's just to encourage the funding organizations, agencies to really rethink that model and just to really, direct also deal with this Southern-based institution. Of course, with the caveat that capacity building related to institutional capacity to handle those grants has to be in place. So slowly by slowly, we can help to reduce some of those disparities by directly working with these institutions as we capacitate them. So it's more of just that I would say on that.
Thank you so much, Joyce. There we go. Thank Jeremy. I can hand over to you quickly.
Yeah, just wanted to add that it sometimes also there's a disparity in the we've talked about capacity, but sometimes it's also a disparity in availability of time and other resources. So, like for instance, a US or UK based institution like Oxford we have a staff that can support the funding proposals, the searches for funding. For a request for proposals. And so, it's whereas a lot of our partner institutions, they don't have that same team that can really be resource mobilization and generating the funding applications one after another. Also with time, you know, a lot of times we think about like time being something that we own, but in a lot of respects, we get, especially in Global South institutions, there's limited professional staff to be able to cover all the different needs of a department. So you might be head of department. I know Leanne was for a few years. Godfrey has do a lot of advocacy work with government. And so that also takes away from the capacity of time to lead on funding applications. So even when, now that we, as Joyce has said, seen a shift in funding priorities for more localized locally led grant applications, but also even from like the National Institute of Health Research in the UK, more equitable relationships across partners. It still comes to a matter of time, capacity, and the infrastructure needed to be able to support those funding applications.
Thank you so much, Jamie. Just moving on to the next question, and I know we'll have an opportunity to hear from other members on the panel. This question, actually, I want to link back to what Mary Ann had highlighted. So Mary Ann is a doctoral student, like you said, based from the Global South, based in the Global North, studying about the Global South context. I wanted to know about how do you think that the lack of expertise and knowledge about developing countries' context in the Global North can be addressed? What do you think some of those issues are and how it can be addressed?
That's a tricky question, Jen. I won't pretend to be an expert on university strategies, but I do have a few ideas in mind. For example, we can think about the hiring policy. It would be great if universities could hire more researchers from the Global South or have had more experience in the Global South contexts. Another thing that comes to mind is maybe to encourage more institutional linkages between countries. I think this is very similar to the Oxford, the department in Oxford, the Global Parenting Initiatives, kind of linking together working together with various universities and other institutions in the Global South context. But I think it could likely be widened to go beyond project-specific arrangements. So, for example, I'm just thinking about the experience of Philippines, wherein there's a transnational education program that was facilitated by the government between UK universities and some Philippine institutions. So in this way, they were co-developing programs that are recognized in both countries. And I think this arrangement has the potential to tap into a wider pool of expertise and knowledge. So there's also, it builds sort of a relationship and also kind of links together the researchers from various contexts. And then moving forward, you would be able to develop the pool of the researchers that could, work, that are based in the Global South, but could also work in the Global North. So there's a lot of mechanisms I know in various countries, but I think those are some suggestions that could be considered.
Thank you so much, Mary Ann, for that. Is there anybody else on the panel that would like to reflect on that? Or we could move to the next question. Sure. Jamie, this is actually a question for you. It was based on something you also mentioned within your opening remarks, and it's around the shifting equity from the privileged universities or institutions to the more disadvantaged ones within the same research-led community or context. And what I wanted to ask here was actually, how do you think this shift could be enacted? What are some of the ways that it could be enacted?
Thanks, Jen. It's a great question. It's interesting. I was while other people on the panel were talking, I was just reflected that everyone on this panel was originally from the Global South, but everyone here was educated at a Global North institution at one point in their career, whether that's a postdoc or their PhD. But what is really heartening to see is that the majority, myself not included in this, have moved back to take that knowledge back to their own country context. And I think that there's an exciting example of how then the work that we can do at more privileged universities. So like, for instance, in South Africa, there's a number of universities that have been historically more advantaged and have benefited from the political inequalities and racial inequalities from the apartheid system, like University of Cape Town, Stellenbosch University, University of Witwatersrand, who have a lot more agency and power than more previously disadvantaged universities like Fort Hare University or University of Western Cape. And similar in the Philippines, where Ateneo de Manila University is, who we partner with quite a lot with Professor Lian, is a privileged university, but there are many, like the University of Visayas and University of Philippines of Visayas, that don't have that same access to the relationships that are trying to address this global south-north divide. And I think one of the exciting things that Leanne and I are trying to do is, in our future collaborations, is to have a key component of building capacity of those other research institutions to be able to lead on randomized control trials and on advocacy within their work, but also, more importantly, to be able to be equal partners in the decision making around those grants and those projects that we're working on. And I think that is critical to even have that idea of, like, where are the power, like Leanne said, where are the power imbalances that exist within our own local contexts, and how can we help promote more equality and equity in research there. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Jeremy. Is there anybody on the panel that would like to reflect on that? We can move on. Let's move on to the next question. This actually is for Leanne. Leanne, also, again, just reflecting on some of the things that you had mentioned in your opening remarks. And so I wondered if you could elaborate a bit on the aspects of investing in a true collaborative relationship between the global north and global south, and what are some of these barriers and possible biases that could exist that would inhibit this type of collaboration?
Yeah, thanks, Jen. I mentioned in my introduction that I've had the opportunity to participate in different kinds of collaboration where, on the one hand, it could be very surface collaboration. I think in a lot of disciplines now, especially in the publication realm, it's like a good thing to introduce someone from a majority world or a global south context. There's a growing recognition of what we call weird literature, Western education, industrialized, I forgot what the R is, and democratic. So 97% of the literature in psychology, for instance, is really from a Western context. And so just pulling in someone who happens to be in the global south looks good. It could look good. And so sometimes I feel that global south researchers are taken advantage of in that respect, or there's that risk of being taken advantage of, like, oh, let's collaborate, you could be co-author, collect all this data. But there's no real learning or mutual exchange or mutual respect. And I think in my culture in particular, by investing in real engagement, it's so important to really, and Jamie knows this, we need to feed you. We need to see you. We need to meet you. Let's have a sit down. Let's have a conversation. Let's talk about our mutual needs and priorities and gaps, making all collaborators feel really, really valued, and that their perspectives are really important in that research. So really going beyond the token participation of a global south researcher, but really acknowledging that they have their own particular knowledge, their own particular expertise, indigenous methodologies, for example, that could really bring a new perspective or a fresh perspective in in any in a research topic. So it could be that this area of study has been, maybe it's not theoretically groundbreaking because it's been studied a lot in the West, but then there is a bias or assumption that this published literature is universal or it's generalizable, but it may be that there are these phenomena that are not universal or generalizable. It's really just American or very Western. But, maybe this phenomenon looks different in a non-Western context. So the assumption that, it's not theoretically groundbreaking, maybe it's not so valuable, but in fact, just the fact that it's diverse, that it might have used a different approach, it already brings something new to the table. So I think that kind of acknowledgement of what Global South researchers could add to the equation, add to knowledge, is really important in true collaboration.
Thank you so much, Leanne, for your response. I think, Joyce, over to you. Please add.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to add to what was said there related to this acknowledging what already exists in terms of capacity and actually working with the capacity that already exists. Capacity building is a really good term that we all like and many donors like. But some donors, I think, are increasingly now questioning this capacity building thing. It's been on and on and on for many years. So is it genuine capacity building that is actually happening within the institutions and collaboration? Or is it just a nice word that you put on a grant and that many collaborations actually struggle to really implement it? So clearly having proper and clear indicators of what's the capacity building that is actually happening. Does a Global North collaborative partner coming to a Global South institution or country that they're working with and collaborating with and teaching research assistant to go do field work in the field, is that capacity building? So those things are happening where some of the things that have already been established, local researchers have the capacity to do some of these things. So just acknowledging what already exists and clearly highlighting the gaps that are being filled as part of that big, interesting story of capacity building, I think would be something nice. Then just really, some sort of to agree with what has been said there about trusting and really believing that the local best researchers could come up with theories that could explain things and not just absorb things that are brought to them. Because the consequence of that is, of course, it perpetuates further inequalities, but also then it leads to problems remaining problems. Solutions are never found to problems. So then it brings around the cycle of doing things and repeating and just wasting resources because no one ever solves the problem. So clearly, acknowledging where capacity exists, reinforcing where it doesn't exist, and having clear indicators would just be something that I want to add on that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joyce, for your response. And my next question was actually going to be linked to capacity building, actually. Jamie, over to you. I think your hand is up.
I was just going to say that when we originally wrote in the Global Parenting Initiative, our original grant, we had capacity building as one of our core areas. And we were challenged by our donor collaborators from the Lego Foundation and Oak Foundation to change that to capacity sharing and to really critically think about how that could be rooted and led by Global South partners. And I mean, the Global Parenting Initiative itself is a collective of 11 different organizations, the majority of whom are based in the Global South. And the capacity sharing element is led by colleagues at the University of Cape Town, and Dr. Godfrey also provides senior strategic input in that. And I think what's really excited is that it's been defined by we have this Future Leaders program that includes like 94 future leaders. Most of them are based either in or from the Global South, and they define what the areas of mentorship and training and opportunities they need and require from that. So it's been really the capacity sharing has been really led by our Global South partners, and even into the key decision-making processes, like in the how we make decisions as a leadership team and as executive. We've made a concerted effort of including early career and middle career researchers in that decision-making process who are from the Global South. So it's been remarkable. It doesn't mean that it's completely like, oh, we're so great, we're doing everything that's been a star on our, on ours. I think, we still have the inherent inequalities of most of the control and the legal aspects are led by University of Oxford, and so there's still a ways to go, but it's trying to tip the balance rather than solve everything in one go. Sorry if I tipped your question, Jen.
No, not at all. Thanks, Jamie. But actually, just to also hear a bit from Zamakanya, do you think, I mean, is there anything else you'd like to add based on what Joyce and Godfrey had shared, Jamie had shared around capacity sharing? Is there anything you think that could assist here?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Jen. I must say, I do appreciate like reframing, the term, a little bit. So, I mean, I made some notes, jotted down a few things. I think that are probably worth highlighting here, and I don't think some of this has come up. So the one thing being training and mentoring programs. So programs that actually equip researchers in the Global South with advanced skills and in research methodologies, data analysis, grant writing, publication, and so on. The other thing I suppose around that could be establishing maybe mentoring or mentorship programs rather that connect early career researchers in the Global South, maybe with more experienced researchers from the Global North, and thereby fostering knowledge exchange, career development, and that sort of thing. Infrastructure development, I think, needs to come up, here, as well. So investing in buildings and upgrading research facilities, labs, libraries, sort of, etc. Something else I suppose that could be mentioned here is, how do you sort of sustain funding, in the long term? So maybe some of that is around encouraging funding agencies to commit to long-term financial support for research projects, right, in the Global South, in ways that then ensure sustainability beyond, just the initial grant periods. What about also advocating for policies that require that a portion of research funding is specifically allocated to capacity building, sharing, infrastructure development, and so on? The promotion of local, sort of leadership. So I suppose what you could look at there is ensuring that, and I think this has come up quite a lot. So ensuring that local leaders are actually a part of decision, making and research projects, that they're setting the agendas and the priorities, and not just doing the actual, just the actual groundwork, right? I suppose what we could also think about there is there a way to facilitate the inclusion of Global South researchers in international research committees, editorial boards, policymaking bodies, and so on. And then finally is just around recognizing and incorporating Indigenous, knowledge, local traditions, and contextual expertise really in research projects, to make sure that we are actually enhancing their relevance. I mean, I think I've got an example of some of this from SAPRIN. So that's the South African Population Research Infrastructure Network. I was actually involved in one of their nodes, their node in Agincourt, Mpumalanga, and they've done really well around sort of capacity building through collaborative networks, if I can put it that way. So A lot of the work that they do involves collaborations between sort of various institutions, including the South African Medical Research Council, other universities, both Global South and Global North, and other research, entities, in South Africa. One of the things that they also do really well is just around engagement of local researchers, right? So, so there are about 6 nodes, sort of now in the country, and the node in Limpopo, just as an example, there, what they do is that they make it a point, right, that local researchers are actually involved in leading studies on demographic and health challenges or changes in communities, right? And so that way they're making sure that researchers are addressing then locally relevant issues. So those are just a couple of examples. I will leave it there.
Thank you so much, Samakanya. And I think we're almost out of time, but I just want to say thank you to the panel, and then also just to look at some of the questions I proposed in the Q&A. And I think just as a reminder, as we move to the Q&A section, that a lot of the panelists, they don't, or all of the panelists don't say that they're experts in this area. It's really just reflections on the experiences and thinking about the specific topic. But let's move to the Q&A. If our panelists could just stay on for a bit longer to answer these questions, because there's obviously a recording that's made available afterwards, and obviously if there are people in the audience that can stay as well, that would be really welcomed. So just looking at some of the questions, I'm going to start right with the very first question that was asked. Are the panelists familiar with the majority versus minority world country terminology? This is being preferred by many as an improvement to global north versus global south, or LMIC versus to HIC. This would be a helpful reference. I think the person is also saying this comes from Kath Draper. I'm not sure if there's anybody that wants to reflect on that, if you're aware of any of this terminology. No? Thanks for that.
Maybe it is a more accurate thing, a way of describing what we're talking about. So we'll definitely look into the article that you shared, Kath. Thanks.
Thanks so much for that. And then David Stern, a lot has been mentioned about the need for more equitable funding opportunities. As a Global North researcher who spent 6 years as a local lecturer in the Global North Institution, I gained a lot from working in a low resource environment. Do the panelists have similar experiences they can share? I think there was some reflection on this from, I think it was Jamie that mentioned most of the panelists had been educated or have done some part of their education in the Global North and are now based at the Global South institutions, or they've moved back to their context. I don't know if anybody wants to reflect on that, or if we should move to the next question. Yeah. Godfrey, you want to go ahead?
I really want to thank David for that, and also Jamie for your insights on this, because I think it's very, myself as well, I was trained in the UK and then also in Denmark, but I'm back in Uganda for many years now. But as I think Leanne said, one of the major risks that we have also coming from that mix of training and perspectives, that as local, based in the Global South, we risk also perpetuating and reproducing the same legacies in our own countries. And, you know, in my case, for example, I'm based in the premier university of the country, Makerere, but there are many other young universities.
Oh, I think we've lost Godfrey. Godfrey, you've just frozen. So Godfrey might just rejoin. And we have a few other questions that we can just have a look at while Godfrey joins us again. I think this is a reflection as well. So this is from Margie Schneider. The issue of publications is a big one to consider because of costs of publication and of the accessing of these. The inclusion of more reviewers from the Global South, I think there was some reflection on this, that forms part of the research infrastructure and library access as well. So another important consideration there. And then Richard Sabo, perhaps we could also start to think about some intentional steps to promote Global South research thought. For example, setting up a regional research hub in the Global South, which could be supported to enable peer learning and coming up with products that can inform local solutions. So I think more on the capacity sharing there as well. See, panelists are nodding. It doesn't seem like there's additional reflection. I think a lot of this it's actually comments, and I think really useful for this discussion as well. Kath has shared, oh, there we go, shared something that looks quite useful. And then Kath is another one for qualitative researchers. Please submit to a special issue. So there we go. There's somewhere we can submit some publications. And then another question, would it be helpful to have a framework of best practices within leading departments in the Global North, which lists the best practices in collaborating with researchers in the Global South? Jamie, your hand is up. Please go ahead.
Yeah, Aman, this is a wonderful idea. And one thing that we've been thinking within the Global Parenting Initiative is how we can share the learning that and some of the challenges that we have experienced along this theme through our facilitate and capacity sharing initiatives. And so I don't think it will be within leading departments in the Global North, but rather maybe coming out of this conversation today with our panelists, something that could come out is some best practices or learning outcomes that have come out of or shared learning outcomes out of this work. So definitely have that on our horizon as we move into the second half of this initiative. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Jamie. I know we've reached time, but I really want to work through if there's not that many questions still. So this, and I think a lot of it is reflection and comments. There's a lot of folks from the Global North that need their capacity built, but really do. I see proposals for that. It's always assumed that capacity needs to be built one way only. So I'm pleased to hear the narrative around capacity sharing. Thank you for that. And then Catherine Morse, it's not just about the structural things around funding and research, it's also about showing equitable respect to visiting researchers, including or inviting Global South researchers to contribute as keynote speakers at conferences in the Global North. Thank you for that, Kath. And then another reflection, I also always wonder if they would really ever open to not even asking the questions. What questions do communities want answered? What does the government want to know? What do local implementers want to deep dive into? I can bet a few will ask for an RCT, though that's what some of us really like. So another reflection over there. And then Rajesh, it is critical to build capacity of undertaking research in LMICs. The local researchers then be supported to mount research in different cultures and subcultures, as the populations are quite heterogeneous in many countries. Are the HMICs and donors in a position to support beyond collaborative project? Yeah, another reflection. A possible question that can't be asked within this panel discussion. And then someone, I think, is responding to your point. There has been a recent publication about it. So thanks to the audience as well for your inputs. And then around, I think, on advocacy and research uptake, how are the researchers thinking about policy engagement given different cultural norms? Again, that I think it's a question for the broader community when thinking about the Global North and Global South research inequalities. It's a good reflection there. And Munira, Aman, okay, there's been another reflection or comment based, just some assistance there. Catherine, the perspectives of practitioners versus academic scholars is important but not discussed. How do the panelists propose better engaging practitioners' perspectives in practice and learning? Any response there before we close?
I think Kathy is already doing great work with that, with the new journal that's come out that is looking at child maltreatment prevention from practitioners' perspectives. But I think that has always been important in the co-design and implementation of research when that comes up to kind of issues that we were discussing about power imbalances within global south contexts and how we are engaging not only the practitioners, but also the beneficiaries themselves. And I really appreciated Maniza's a comment about the questions and making sure, that people are really, maybe we need to ask fewer questions and be more open to what questions need to be asked that are being asked already or coming from communities and practitioners. And that has driven a lot of some of our research. I never would have gotten into implementation science if it weren't for the facilitators of some of the programs asking, how can we make this a little bit more feasible for us? Because we are struggling to deliver this program that now has been tested in a randomized control trial. So I think it's really important to keep our ears open and maybe my mouth shut.
Thanks, Jamie. And then finally, Jessica shared that they'll be hosting a convening in Abu Dhabi in October, which focuses on bringing together Arab and African researchers with the goal of finding ways to address the research issues that we have been talking about. So there's something to look forward to as well.
Where can we find details around that?
I'm not sure if Jessica is still on the call, but we can definitely reach out to Jessica and we can share that as well. Maybe it is a hybrid event that people can actually link up with. Okay, so we've gone quite a bit over time, but I'd just like to thank our panelists again for sharing your insights and experiences today. I think it's just one of those conversations that we needed to open up as well. And I'm glad that we could do that here today. And I'm sure this isn't the end of the conversation. Hopefully we'll have a follow-up, but also just to acknowledge that it's an ongoing and it's beyond just this community that had linked up to this call today. So thank you again for your time and your sharing your experiences. And please, for those that are still on the call, the recording will be made available, I think, within the next week. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jen, bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.